The canteen is open for business. It's good to see everyone, both of you, everyone, I guess, a lot of people, just two of you.
All of us.
All of us, all the audience that will eventually watch this video when we go viral. But there's a sign. We put a sign in front of the cantina today, which says image bearers only.
Oof.
Image bearers only, which is a good segue into our topic tonight. We're going to talk about what is the image of God. And it's as simple as a question as that, and as complicated as a question as that. More specifically, though, we're going to look into what is the Bible, what kind of language does the Bible use, because it uses image language, and what is the theology behind image language? What are some of the views, contemporary views of image today that we probably hear in church circles? And do we agree or disagree with some of those contemporary views? And what do we actually think the Bible and God is doing with that kind of language? So that's the topic tonight. And this is Brian's, I think most of the things we talk about are probably Brian's specialty. But Genesis, image bearing, Brian, you've done a lot of study in this, so I'm going to hand it over to you as far as where you want to start.
Well, I mean, I think we should probably start right at the beginning, right? So just reading the passage that everyone kind of gets their ideas from in the first place. And that, of course, is the creation account in Genesis chapter 1, starting at verse 26. So anyone want to read that? So I'm not the only one talking for
I'll read it.
The next hour.
I'll read it. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness, so they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the cattle and over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move on the earth." God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. You want the mandate too? Because I think that plays a part,
because
right?
I think that's the part everybody forgets to read or something along with it.
Yeah. So verse 28, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I now give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the entire earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the animals of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to all the creatures that move on the ground. Everything that has breath of life in it I give, every green plant for food." It was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. There was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
Yeah. So why are the green plants made?
There will be yours for food.
Yeah. Why is the sun and the moon and the stars made?
So the plants can grow.
You didn't know I was going to quiz you guys.
So the plants can grow, so they can eat it. So
no, I mean in the text.
Oh.
We're going back.
For signs and seasons and
oh yeah.
To mark the days.
Yeah. Why are the fish made? Swim in the ocean. I literally, that's what the text says. So in other words, the reason why things are made, what accompanies them is the reason why they're made. Like they're not just made. There's a reason why they're made, and it tells us in the text why they're made. So, without even talking about the image at all for a minute, why are humans made? It's verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens, over every living thing that moves on the earth." So man's made for that reason, to have dominion over them by being fruitful and multiplying.
And
so
in my translation, that's actually an explanation point. So 28, the first two, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth," has an explanation point. I don't know what the Hebrew's doing there, why they would do that.
Wait, it says "be fruitful, multiply, fill it." Like each thing, "be fruitful!" Exclamation point, or is it?
Be fruitful, multiply! Exclamation point. Fill the earth and subdue it! Exclamation point.
No, that's a translator doing that. Yeah. So he's disconnecting it from the mandate. So it's sort of like
those are independent clauses,
right? Rather than, I mean, each thing. All you have to do logically, again, the vav is not. It doesn't mean and. It's just a connector. in some way, or even disconnects depending on what is following it. But here you have to figure, well, how are these things connected? And all you have to do is look at the logic of it. Be fruitful. What does fruitful do? Well, it multiplies you. Multiply. What is multiplication going to do? Well, it fills the earth. Well, what's filling the earth going to do? Well, that's going to cause you to subdue it, and subduing it, well, what's that going to lead to? Well, you rule over it. So each thing is connected to the other. Like, do this in order to do this, that leads to this and this and this, and then it finally leads to you ruling over. And why are humans to rule over the earth, to where they take over the earth? They're to fill it up in that way, because chaos itself, in God's mind, because his purpose is humanity, is a humanless world. And so we're to actually participate with God in filling up the earth. It is literally the purpose of not just making humans, but making them male and female, so that they now actually function in a creative capacity, not because they create ex nihilo as though they're creating life, but as instruments of God's creation to fill up the earth with humanity. And so this is important because it's connected to what's said before, that man is the image and likeness of God. And what people usually do with that is they say, look, image of God means one of 3, 4, 5 different things or whatever. And likeness to me sounds like maybe we're like God in some way. And so in what way are we like God? And so you have rabbis in it, the substantive view, say that, well, maybe God has a body. And you have Mormons who say God definitely has a body, is a human like we are. Right. And we're made like that. And then you have people who are more orthodox, who are like, well, God doesn't have a body, so we can't be like God in our bodies, which is fascinating because image and likeness usually is a physical thing.
Right.
So we're not like God in our bodies at all, but in our spirits, we're like God. And it almost leads to this Neoplatonic, frankly, Gnostic view of humanity, to where the true human is really inside. Then it's really our spirits, because that's what's like God, rather than, my body being like God or anything. And so a lot of people will see that and they say, well, that's too much. And so maybe we're like God, and it includes our physicality, and it's talking about maybe our minds as they use our brains, and
they kind of use like enlightenment language, where maybe the image has to do with reasoning or moral capacity, and then that becomes more the thrust of it.
It was interesting. I was watching something today where the guy was making that argument of, well, humans have the ability to use reason and logic. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if only people who have no knowledge of animals make that argument. Like, animals constantly reason and use logic. It's why you can train an animal. They're like,
well, I bring up beavers all the time in this discussion. Like, they build.
I have no idea why, but go ahead.
They build the most intricate dams. Like, we model our dams off of what they do. Don't tell me they don't have ingenuity. And
well, how do you teach an animal to jump through a hoop? It reasons that, if I jump through this hoop, I'm gonna get a treat. That's logic. That's reason. That's why you can train an animal that way, because they associate. Like, logic is just interwoven in the world. Like, the animals wouldn't be able to function if they didn't use logic. So it's not a higher logic. They're not writing like philosophical discourses or something, but they are actually.
You don't speak their language.
Well, they're going to call that instinct, right? They're going to say, well, that's just instinct. They're that's like a program. They're programmed to do these things.
Well, and if you take the donkey story literally in numbers, I'm not saying, not all people do, but if you take it literally, then actually that donkey is pretty prolific.
He knows that he doesn't want to die. That angel is going to chop his head off.
The precursor to Shakespeare there.
Yeah, he's like, look, dude, I've been with you all these years, and I haven't actually failed you. So why don't you think about the fact that I stopped all of a sudden? Maybe it was for a reason, you stupid human. I mean, it's kind of like, now, regardless, like the point is that cannot be it, right? Angels reason. They're actually smarter than we are. So it can't even be higher reason. Can't be higher logic. The devil reasons. The devil's the image of God. And so people are like, well, we have to be like God in some way, but then you end up making humanity not really the unique image of God. Now, like Michael Heiser, you have people like Michael Heiser who are like, yeah, well, angels are an image of God. They're an image of God in heaven.
Yeah.
And we're the image of God on earth. And it's like, well, okay, here's the problem with that view. The point of being an image, I should say, in the ancient Near Eastern world, and I think in this text, I'll just kind of out it right here, is that you have like these images of kings placed in certain places, right? That image represents the king, meaning that king rules over that area. Why is it there? Because the king's not there. So the king's not there. It represents the king. Because he's not there, because you don't see him, you need that image there to represent him. In the same way, that's what man is for God on the earth. You don't see God, and so man is the physical representation that God rules over the creation. But in heaven, you do see God. God is in heaven, and he's everywhere. He's not invisible to heavenly eyes, to spiritual eyes. He's in the spiritual realm. So it doesn't make sense to have images in heaven. That makes no sense whatsoever. And communicated to what? Creation's down here. So all it is you have images communicating to other images that they represent God. That it doesn't make any sense. So, and frankly, through Revelation, we're never told that angels are images. That's just completely made up.
Right.
So he tries to get it from the us statement here, but I think it's a cryptic statement that's Trinitarian, and I mean I have all sorts of reasons for that, but ultimately, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so if we just to make it clear for our listeners, so we have the substantive view. What we're arguing for primarily would be a functional view, right? In that the image is tied to the role, is tied to how man is supposed to represent God in the world. And then you also have the relational view that I think is a component of a proper understanding of image.
Yeah, I think so. I might want to call our view. So, well, let me break down the two different relational views first. So you described the functional view well, and then I just described the substantive view. The neo-Orthodox relational view is kind of more one of when you are in relationship with God, you become his image. So it actually is an on and off thing to where you can not be the image one moment and be the image the next. It's kind of a Bardian view or whatever. So when you're really in Christ, you're the image of God. When you're not, then you're not really the image of God. Which, I mean, I think the problem with that is that our relational view is that you're a son of God. You are in relationship with God as a son, including the women, by the way. So you're in relationship with God as a son. So that favor as a son, we represent God. You see this language all throughout the ancient Near East, by the way, with kings. Their sons are their image and likeness.
But you see this even with Adam and Seth, right? That
right.
Adam fathers Seth in his image and his likeness.
Right, exactly. Same thing. And so there's a relational aspect to where we're his sons. We're in relationship with God as his sons. And as his sons, we are tasked with a purpose, which is we are to be the agents through which our Father King does his kingly work over creation, namely being fruitful and multiplying, filling the earth with human beings, covenant human beings. And so we are being used by our Father as an agent in the same way that a king who might go away because he takes his army and he leaves his son on the throne. His son is not now making up his own stuff. His son is actually enacting his policies and his decrees, the decrees of his father. And he then is an agent of his father. His father is actually working through him while he's absent in that regard. And so the son and father, the relational and functional view work together. And so I would call our view the relational functional view.
Relational.
Relational functional. with
Nice.
a dash. Because it requires being and then doing, and lo and behold, what do you actually have? I think the story of the Bible is God teaching people you can't just do with the nature that you have once you're fallen. You're no longer a son. I have to readopt you. I have to adopt you now as a son, because you've cut yourself off. You've become the son of the devil. You've cut yourself off. So I have to adopt you as sons now first. So in that relationship, then I'm the vine, you're the branches, you abide in me, and then you can do the functional stuff that I told you to do. Then you can do the works that I told you to do. That's, to me, that's the message of the Bible. You have to be born again. You have to be regenerate now. And in being, and Matthew the same way, like you have to be a peacemaker in order to make peace. It's not just about making peace. Be in a relationship with God and be that thing, and then you do those things.
This kind of reveals the importance of reading Genesis well. So in our modern context, we don't, right? The church does not read Genesis well. The church, even they might say it in the background. Yeah, there's a lot of temple language in Genesis, but that's just kind of in the background. What really matters is that, God created all things, and we need to fight. We need to fight Dawkins. We need to fight Hitchens. We need to fight Samuel Harris. Right. So this is the ultimate point of Genesis, is to combat the naysayers. But when you but if you put in the forefront what Genesis is actually trying to do, which is describing temple, like a cosmic temple, and if you understand, like if we were in a education system that would teach us, maybe what people were doing back when Scripture was being written and engaging with cultures, seeing that there are other people around Israel who were writing things and having certain gods create, and right, and this idea that every god has a temple, and every temple has an image, and as you said, an image is supposed to be authority of the king, while they're absent or whatever, but it also is to beautify the temple. It is the means by which that God harnesses chaos, right? So I think like Baal wasn't the top god, but he was the one that kind of ordered things, and you have Marduk and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So and now if you have it like what you were saying with the relational functional view, if you have an image that says, I hate this temple, I don't like the veneer. I'd rather have silver than gold, and I'm gonna fashion it in my own way, which is ultimately what the image bearers Adam and Eve did, right? They said, well, we're gonna do what we want with this temple.
Yeah, so now redesign this, and by doing so, then you become the image of a different god, which is the devil rather than God.
Right. And
now it's the devil's temple.
Right. And to your point, so now what happens to the images?
Yeah.
They can't just come back and say, well, wait, no, I want to come back in this temple now and do what I was supposed to do. Well, you're soiled. You can't be in this temple anymore. You're ugly. Right. And like, so you either have to like be removed permanently, or you have to be remade. Right. And that's to your point. And that is like, and I wish people would see the entirety of the gospel, and the entirety of it is in Genesis.
Yeah.
Well, so it
blows my mind.
That's like one of, I guess, the questions that I've had as I've been looking through all of this and trying to think through all of this. And I don't know if I'll even be able to articulate this question right. So, help me along here. But if we understand that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, that he is the fullness of what it means to be the image, and then we adopt some kind of enlightenment mentality, the fatherhood of God, brotherhood of man, and we just slap that image onto everyone because, we all want participation trophies or whatever. It seems like there is maybe not an outright denial of the gospel, but that there are severe implications to the gospel then when you're attributing what belongs fully to Christ to everyone who is even apart from Christ.
Yeah, I mean, if you if you think about it, ultimately people have to be saying, if everyone's the image of God, everyone's like Jesus.
Yeah, and that is that's a different gospel.
Well, yeah, ultimately, like, then you're like, oh no, I don't mean that everyone's like Jesus. It's like, well, wait a minute then.
But he's the image.
If he's the image and likeness of God, and everyone's not like him, well, are there two images and likenesses?
And there's a lesser image and then a higher image. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to end up with two, and that's what happens in church history. Frankly, you have a lot of people then say, well, there's two. And they even divorce the words, right? Image means one thing, likeness means another. So image is just, again, that higher intellect, moral ability, that sort of thing. Likeness is that you're actually like God, and not everybody has that, but everybody has the image. Then in the Reformation, you actually have more reformers, which most Reformed people today don't even realize, reject that idea and say, no, they're one and the same. I think Calvin says they're one and the same, and therefore, but he still kind of puts that both of those ideas in there.
Yeah.
But most Reformed confessions and a lot of reformers that I think people don't realize hold what we do, which is, no, humanity is no longer the image of God. It's the image of the devil. Only Christians are restored because they're restored to sonship, and restored then with being restored, they then do the works of Christ, and therefore they are the image and likeness of God because they're like Christ. That's the historic, I would say that's the dominant Reformed view. Luther himself even believed that. But you've got a lot of Reformed confessions as well. As we get to the Enlightenment, suddenly that seems very divisive, because you have all these religious wars going on. How can we unite people? You have the American project of trying to unite people in some sort of like more generic Christianity. It's kind of a really more generic religion. It's like, Judeo-Christian type thing or whatever. It's that sort of like, American program or whatever. But because of that, what forms is this mantra of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. And if you have the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, that means everyone's in a relationship with God as God being their father. And if everyone's in a relationship with God as God being their father, what does that make them? They're all sons. And if they're all sons, then guess what? They're all God's images. And so we don't like that. That's liberal. That's the mantra of liberalism. If anyone does not realize or recognize it, that is the liberal mantra: fatherhood of God, brotherhood of man. Orthodox Christians don't like that, but what all liberals did is they just changed the vocabulary. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. We'll just do everybody's God's image and everybody's your neighbor.
Yeah, and I think the kicker is that people want to have a way to distinguish between man and animal, right? They want to have value for humanity. I think rightfully so. They want to have a value for humanity. And so they don't know any other way to do that besides image. So they just use image. That there is like this argument that, well, man, has to have something inherent in his form, right? To fulfill this function, which I think is true. I mean,
yeah.
you can tell me if this is a good analogy or not. So for instance, like a woman is made to be a mother. She's physically made by God to be a mother. She has the capacity physically and emotionally and intellectually to be a mother. That's how she is made in her form to be able to do a particular function. But let's say that woman throws that off and decides, I'm never going to have physical or spiritual children. I am not going to fulfill that role in any way. She's not a mother. She has the capacity. She's been made with the form to be a mother, to fulfill that role, but she doesn't take on that role. That's kind of how I look at the image. It's like man was made with the form and the capacity and ability to be the image, to function in that role. But if he throws it off, he's not the image.
Yeah, a bowl is made to, eat your stew in, right? But let's say the bowl had some sort of like choice it can make. And it's like, yeah, I don't want stew to be in me or whatever, though. I'd rather someone like, I don't know, pee in me or something, or throw up in me or something. And it's like, okay, well, that's great. You're no longer really functioning as the thing you were made for then. So you're not actually a stew bowl anymore. So you may be a bowl. I would say man's an image. Yeah, you're an image. You're not an image of God. You're an image of the devil. But you are an image. You're made to be an image. Now you're made for the purpose of being God's image. But you can walk, like Drake was saying, you can be in that temple and be like, you know what? I don't like this temple. I want a different God to be in this temple. So I don't want this to be the temple of God. I want this to be the temple of the devil, because the devil says that I can be a God, and I want to follow him and all of that. And by the way, that's how the devil gets the world, by the way, because if we decide to image him, guess whose world it is then? It's his. And that's why he's called the God of this world in scripture. He's the prince of the power of the air. He rules in the invisible realm. But ultimately then, yeah, so you're always an image. Like people I think confused are like, oh, are you saying that people aren't human? And it's like, yeah, no, of course you're human. Why would I make a dumb argument like you're not human? Or of course you're able to do, but like April just argued, like you can be made to be a mother and then choose, I'm not going to be a mother, which by the way, I would say a woman being made to be a mother is her participation in the image of God. A man made to be a father is his participation in the image of God, and either one can be like, yeah, I'm not going to do that, which is again why I think the original couple are deciding, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to use sexuality to do that.
We wouldn't say like all women are mothers, all men are fathers. You would say they're not actually doing that. They're not fulfilling that role. You can't divorce image and mission.
Well, I think it's as easy, I think, as if you're concerned with differentiating animals with humans, and how are we not then just animals if everyone is not somehow in the image of God? Well, I think when Adam is naming the animals and he's like, no, 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 everyone thinks that he's just given a task to just name things, right? And it's not attached to the dominion command. So God has made a command, fill the earth, multiply. And then Adam's like, okay, how do I do that? Right. Well, I'll find the one that will help me do that. None of the animals can do that.
Yeah.
So there's the difference. And this is kind of your point, April, like there's a dividing line of animal and human. Animals can't allow Adam to fulfill that mandate. But then the woman comes, bone after my bone, flesh of my flesh, right? And now her attached to him, that is the only two that can actually do what God commanded. So animals don't have the capacity. So if in the fallen world, the idea of like, well, if everyone isn't imaging God, if we have some imaging God and some imaging Satan, why don't we just put all the imagers of Satan on an island and nuke it? Right? I mean, that's what, right?
Yeah, you get rid of evil that way, right?
Right. You get it. Well, and then of course, like the problem is, because God's people are there, right? So let God nuke them when it's his, right? When he deems it's time. But up until that time, he's going to adopt, right? Reattach, as Brian, as you're talking about, to the vine, to the actual image of Christ. And that's why there's actually value. The value is in what God is.
Let me stop you. Let's talk about the value, because I feel like we're gonna be all over the place. So we start with the value first, because that is a huge conversation we need to have. It's about the value issue. That's like, I think that's one of the largest things we need to talk about.
Well, let me just attach it to the differentiation then. So the differentiation then is attached to Adam naming the animals.
Yeah.
There's the separation. Yeah. And whether you're a father or a mother, whether you're going to do what's commanded, that's a separate issue. But if you're worried about, well, what makes us not animals, that is what differentiates man from animal.
Well, and I want to let me say something really controversial based on something that April just said as well, and that is, you can't. She said you can't divorce the
image and mission.
The image and mission, right? I would argue, based on what we just argued with the relational functional view, you can't divorce the relationship from the function, which tells you that if Christians are repeating the sin of what I think is the sin of Adam and Eve and seen throughout Genesis of anti-creational sexuality and whatnot, and not being someone who perpetuates the filling of the earth and the preservation of humanity, true humanity, the covenant humanity and all that, then that actually says that you actually don't have the relationship either. I think that's a huge point to be made, that ultimately, now I'm not saying someone might be immature and they have a relationship and they grow into it, but eventually you're going to have that functionality or you don't have the relationship. And frankly, I think that's another huge message in the Bible, to where, yeah, if you preserve covenant people through, they're naked and you give them clothing and you have the world's needs and you give to them or whatever, that testifies to your relationship as sons of God. And if you don't do that, it testifies in your relationship to the devil and that you're not sons of God. I think that's really clear. And again, it's all here in Genesis, but it's worked out through the rest of Scripture to where no murder, like John says, no murderer will enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, why? Because they're not sons of God. That's why. So you can't divorce the two. It's really important that we understand this. And it's so much easier to say, yeah, I don't want all that stuff or whatever. And you know what? It sounds like it's saying that I'm the likeness of God, which means that I'm like God in some way. And in what way am I like God? And so this sounds like a Jesus again. Yeah. Which normally would be fine, right? Normally, look, we use sounds like a Jesus, and it's actually good exegesis when you're speaking your own language in your own culture. That works really well. Yeah. Because the reference that the language is going to. You can, that sounds like this to me, and I know what it normally refers to in my culture. The problem is if I were to be speaking to you, and I'm going to use now Chinese culture and use that as my reference, even though you'd be like, I'm not referencing Chinese culture. What do you mean? You're convoluting everything I'm saying. That's what we're doing with the Bible. We're taking modern ideas and what it sounds like to us. We don't have the ancient Near Eastern world as our reference. If they were to hear this language, not one of them would be like, oh, we must be like God in some way. Not one of them would have thought that. They would have thought, oh, image and likeness. Okay, then that has something to do with sonship and representation in terms of sovereignty and kingly power. And we get it. That has to do with then being in relationship with a king, being in relationship to a father, and enacting that father or king's commands and decrees in the world. That's what that has to do with. Oh, and what's the command and decree? Oh, be fruitful and multiply, fill up the earth, and subdue it and rule over it.
I want to go back a little bit, maybe 5 minutes, or at this point, maybe 10 minutes ago. But we talked about the Enlightenment and it's muddying the waters. But if the goal, if we're going to say the goal of the Enlightenment is to have this development of human intellect and reason, where God becomes secondary. God might have been primary to get us to this point, but now we all have this ability to reason, and man is reaching this pinnacle where all wars and will be done away with diplomacy, right? And just we'll come together, our intellects will come together and we'll solve all the problems, right? Really kind of the Star Trek idea, right? It is kind of building to this utopia. World War I shatters that idea, right? So World War I says, actually, if you lie to everybody and say that everyone is somehow the image of God, you have the spark of God in you, whether you do things that God commands you to do or not, then you treat everyone equally. So when the serpent comes in the garden, you go, oh yeah, you're an image of God. Come on in.
Like AOC said, we're all the image of God, right?
Right. Like if AOC is parroting this idea, like please, evangelicals, you have to say like, okay, we might be missing something, because that was the Enlightenment's lie. And that lie ended up costing more lives in the span of 50 years. Let's just say 100, because we can add in Vietnam and all the after wars that were part of this Enlightenment. It kind of peters out in the Cold War, but that's what that lie cost humanity, and it was a judgment, right? It was probably one of the worst judgments that since creation we've seen ever. And it started with this misapplication of image, because the gospel no longer matters. It's because everyone has the spark. You just have to let everyone know their potential.
Well, that's why you get the social gospel come onto the scene, right? Doctrines don't matter, because that divides. We're all the image of God, and therefore let's functionally act like the image. Let's start taking care of the poor and have all sorts of social programs and all of that. And it's very generic. And look at the amount of money that's depleted from the churches, because hey, everybody's the image of God. Everybody's my neighbor. And so, that'll be the next podcast if we talk about it or something. But the idea is that, like, well, okay, now the church has no resources because it's just given out to all these social programs, to any Joe that comes along the church and says they need this or that or the other thing. And then we're not actually supporting the sons of God and taking care of them. This idea has been pushed through to try to push through like liberal agendas on numerous issues. To again, pouring money into different places and just seeing humanity as all equal. And of course, we'll talk about it later, but it's tied to racism and abortion and all sorts of issues that I think detract from understanding the uniqueness and the urgency of becoming a son of God through the gospel of Jesus Christ immediately. Because if you already are a son of God, then why do you even, what does Jesus even come for then? To forgive people who are already God's sons? Okay. But do I really need it in the end?
I'm kind of thinking of this on the fly, so maybe it doesn't make sense. But as you're talking about this and you're thinking about gospel implications, if we look to the end of all things, right, and you see the judgment, are we saying, for those who believe that everyone is the image, are they saying that someone who is the image of God, who has something of God, whatever you want to say that is, something of God attached to them, is going to take that something of God into eternal damnation with them?
James White says yes. I've heard James White been asked that
Like,
question.
how can something of God, a quality that, because I've often heard it talked about as if it's some kind of godlike quality. So something of God's can be in eternal damnation. I don't understand that.
Everyone, the biggest thing for me is the representative idea, which everyone believes, right? So even if you hold to the substantive view, you believe that mankind then represents God in some way. And so if man represents God and he's being punished in hell, that's a problem.
What is
theologically?
What is
that's horrible. God's not being punished for anything, nor the man would represent God. Or imagine this is a big fictional story, although it's not fictional, where the character represents God and then he's being punished in hell. That would be blasphemous. So no, that's not happening. And we'll get to, when we discuss the worth idea, the fact that the scripture indicates that man is not the image of God, and God does not consider him that way.
Right. And it can't, because Christ is, if you wanted to test that, you look at the one who is the image, who is called nothing lacking in that regard, in that idea of image, and he is not in hell.
Well, Notice he's the image of God.
Right.
And it's like, oh, you mean among the other like billions and billions? It's like, oh, there's the lion. And it's like, and then you're pointing to like 50 gazillion lions. It's like, what do you mean the lion? It's a lion in the midst of a bunch of other lions or whatever. The fact that he's the image means he's the only one who actually is the image now among humanity. Nobody else is. And so we have to now be in him, federally partake in him, become one body with him in order to become the sons of God again through adoption, because we're not the sons of God already. We're not the image already.
Right.
Now, one of the things, do you guys want to go to Genesis 9 because people will be like, well, but Genesis 9.
I wrote down in my notes, gotcha passages. Genesis 9:6 and James 3:9 are the ones that people go to.
And we can talk about this, and this will actually lead into the value discussion. Unless did you have something else, Drake, before we want to go there?
No. Well, I was just going to reemphasize. I don't mean this in a derogatory way for those that believe in the substantive view, but the silliness of saying like, well, we're the image of God, we just have mud on our face, because the problem is, that ultimately is Pelagianism, right? Because if it really all the problem was mud on your face, well, you just need
get a wet rag, just
get a wet rag,
off.
And Christ is then just a representative, not replacement. But
it's funny that you mentioned that, because I just watched a video and it's called The Image of God, like a short movie. It was done by this guy or whatever in his dorm room or something, I don't know, but he literally, so he's talking about how we're made in the image of God. He literally walks up to a mirror, because the mirror is the image. So apparently we look like God too.
Cool.
But of course that's the idea. In some way we look like God or whatever. But the mirror is like all smudgy. And all he does is he wipes it off, and then you see the face of Jesus as the and it's like, oh, interesting. Yeah, he did.
He wipes it off himself.
Yes, he wipes it off, but I'm sure that's meant. I'm sure that's meant to mean that the God, it's some kid making himself. He probably didn't have anybody else to wipe it off for him, but he wipes it off, which is bad imagery though, if you take that to represent, you doing it. But let's say it's the gospel through the gospel, it's just wiping away a smudge that you can see that Jesus is already in you.
Yeah.
It was just a smudge that wasn't allowing you to see it. And it's like, oh, okay, that's a completely different religion. That's not what the Bible tells us at all. You wouldn't have to be adopted as sons then. You already are sons. You just have to actually get cleaned off so you can see, look, you're a son.
Just believe in yourself and recognize who you already are.
Yeah, miracles can happen when you believe. That's what the song says.
Yeah, it's just a self-help gospel.
Yeah. So Genesis 9, this is the big, wait a minute. The whole reason why you can't kill a human being is because they're the image of God. And that means that everybody's the image of God, because you're not allowed to kill any human beings at all. Right. So he says in chapter 9, starting in verse 4, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood, and for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it. From man, from his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. And then he says this: whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his image. Now, that last statement people take to mean, oh, well, God made man in his image, therefore you can't kill them. They have value to where if you kill them, you're killing a representative of God, and you can't do that or whatever. Now, the immediate logical problem that interpretation, even though it's traditional and probably the only one with which most people are familiar, but the immediate problem that arises is that God literally tells man to kill man here for killing man. And why is it wrong to kill man? Well, because he's the image of God. So if it's wrong to kill, everybody's the image of God, even the murderer. and it's wrong to kill someone because they're the image of God, it would be wrong to kill the murderer for killing. Like, it doesn't make any sense. If the whole reasoning is you cannot kill an image of God, that's what's wrong about it. It's like, well, then the punishment should be lock him away for the rest of his life. It can't be you kill him. So that's kind of always really an odd thing anyway. There are actually two different ways you can take it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the one I'll bring up, because it was actually, I just basically heard it today from a scholar at Gordon Conwell, Catherine McDowell, that book that I sent you guys. But her view is, well, I'll give you her view first. Her view is essentially this: because image of God is talking about the relationship aspect, the idea is that the image of God, you're not to kill those who are actually sons of God. Now, she would apply that again. She's combining she's not actually questioning the central thing that everybody's the image. So she's thinking everybody's a son of God, right? Everybody's an image, which I think is completely anti-biblical. So totally bad.
Does she say that everyone's a son of God?
It's clear in the way that she's talking about it. She does talk about everyone being an image of God, and therefore an image means son, and so in relationship with God, and so it ends up being that. So her theology is bad. She's misapplied it. However, if you understood it correctly, I think that everyone is not the image. What you would then be saying is that this is talking about if you kill someone who actually is the image of God, someone in relationship with God, that is someone in the covenant community, that is actually what brings the wrath of God upon someone or whatever. That's not the way I take it anyway, but you could take it that way.
Does verse 7 help at all? Because you have that that imperative.
You have it again.
And then you have verse 7, which seems to differentiate between the one who murders to the one who puts them to death. Yeah. That because they, the ones that put them to death as actual image bearers, they are then also to do what they had been commanded prior. So but as for you, be fruit. So there's a differentiation in the murderer and the executioner.
Well, and that's the statement there is actually the final element in an inclusio. So the entire thing is framed in be fruitful and multiply. So if you read earlier in 9, it's be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, 9:1 says that.
Yeah, and then it's be fruitful and multiply. So everything is in context of you are to be God's image in what you're doing. And this is important. So contextually, in the immediate context, I would argue in the immediate context, in the literary context of Genesis, and in the larger context of the Bible, the canonical context, all of them would indicate that this is not saying that everybody's the image of God. And one, I would say, because the image is the person doing the thing that's commanded.
Right.
So in each thing, be fruitful and multiply. Who's doing that? The image. Okay, so the image is to be fruitful and multiply. Then God commands them to not just eat plants, but also meat, because they're going to have to expand their food supply and resources because they're in a wicked world. And so they need to actually expand on that from not just eating plants, but also food. Who's doing that? The image is doing that. He's eating more foods now, including meat. Then that means that the command to actually take the life of a murderer is the command to the image. And so the reason why God gives him the command is because he's the image. So when it says, for God made man in his own image, that's referring to the fact that you are to slay the murderer. Why? Because you're the image of God. You're the one who represents God, and therefore you are to enact capital punishment, because that's what the king has decreed. That's what's going to actually fill the earth with humans. Get rid of the murderers, because that's going to decrease humanity. So get rid of the murderers. You're to slay them, because that's part of the job of the image now. Part of the job of the image then is, and therefore be fruitful and multiply. So the job of the image is make sure that earth is filled up with what he does. And in his ruling, in his gathering of food, he's to make sure the earth is preserved and filled up with humans. And in his dealing with crime, specifically murder, he's to make sure that he preserves and fills up the earth with humans. That means take the life of the murderer. So it's not saying every man's a murderer. The larger context of Genesis indicates then not everyone is the image of God, because we look, for instance, in 4 and 5 in the genealogies. And in chapter 4, Cain is never described as the image of God. No one in his genealogy is ever described that way. And his activity is all about preserving, so preservation, but not creation. Preservation in the absence of procreation. Procreation is really minimal, so it's only one kid. And I think the last guy has 2 kids, like Lamech has 2 kids, and you're like, hey, he's going to fill up the earth. But then he ends up murdering a guy. So then we're down to just 1 again from him. So that's who they are. They're actually, Cain is viewed as a murderer, and then Lamech at the end, another inclusio. They're murderers. So how is that genealogy viewed? Murderers, anti-creationists, if you want to put them that way. But the next genealogy, they're described as those who are made in the image and likeness of Adam, who is the image and likeness of God. He's the son of God in that way. And they're all described as one thing. What's the one thing they're described as?
Having sons and daughters.
Having other sons and daughters. So they have a son, and then it says, and they had other sons and daughters. And they had other sons and daughters. They don't build cities. Maybe they do build cities, but the text doesn't care. It wants to focus on they have other sons and daughters. They're being fruitful and multiplying and filling up the earth and subduing it and ruling over it through that. And because of that, you get the idea that there's a line of people, there's righteous people who are in relationship with God, who are being fruitful and multiplying, and there's people who are not in a relationship with God, and they're frankly anti-creational in what they're doing, and their activity shows who they are. They're not sons of God. They're not images of God, as opposed to the people who are. That's the literary context here, where I would say, okay, well, the immediate context seems to indicate that this is talking about specific people and not all humanity. The literary context seems to indicate it's talking about specific people and not all of humanity. And then the larger canonical context, when we look at things like, you and April bringing up Christ as the image of God, and the fact that we've been made as the new man has been made in the image of God, that's being actually conformed to that image that we've been made in Jesus Christ. It's like, why do I need to be made in the image of God in Christ as the new man if I'm already the image of God? That doesn't make any sense.
You need to have some extra image.
Right. It's like, wait, what? I'm already the image. How am I being made in the image and likeness of God? That doesn't make sense. And it's interesting because Ephesians, I forget which uses which, but Ephesians, and these are parallel passages in Ephesians and Colossians. Ephesians, I think, uses likeness, and Colossians, I think, uses image. But they're parallel. They're interchangeable. Same thing. And they each refer to the character of Christ that's been made in the new man. And it talks about us that we're actually being conformed to that, not that we are that already. So this goes to the value issue of, because a lot of people will be like, oh, well, now I don't have a reason not to murder people who are not the image. Then I guess I can murder unbelievers and eat them for lunch. It's like, I was
going to use the nuke 'em on an island analogy, but we can use the cannibal one.
I've heard the cannibal one. What's funny is it's like, okay, so that's a fascinating argument. So do you then argue that because your dog is not the image, you're free to beat your dog, kill it, eat it? I mean, some people might say I'm free to eat it, but I mean, like, abuse it. Are you free to abuse it? Because I mean, it doesn't have any worth, right? Because if it's not the image of God, then it's not valuable. It's like, no one's making that argument. Jesus says birds are valuable to God. You're worth many birds, but it doesn't mean I don't eat birds.
I think the problem is that when we talk about the image being some inherent characteristic in everyone, we lose sight of the fact that when we talk about image, you are to be like God in your actions. So God is creative. God values life. So it doesn't make any sense to argue that the believer who doesn't agree that everyone is the image is going to go out and, kick a dog or eat his neighbor, because ultimately you are to do what God would do, because
Right.
that's how you're imaging him.
Yeah.
Well, so I would say, what did he do? So in Genesis 3, what did he do? So they became image bearers of Satan right then. Did God kill them and eat them? Did God, right?
Yeah.
Right. So actually, God, in his mercy and compassion, provided a way of salvation. So if then we are to do that, then for those that are not in the image of God, what do? We provide them means of salvation, which is
Well,
right.
And I think that's important. The image of God is just like God. So you guys just basically said two different things that were kind of the same thing, and that is that God is just. The image of God will be just then. The image of God may kill you, like in this passage, if you're a murderer, because that's just. But to kill you if you're not a murderer, to kill you when you're not civilly guilty of a capital crime would be unjust, and God himself wouldn't do it. Therefore, his image is not going to do it either. I tell people, I say this all the time. If I don't go down the street and kick a dog, or see someone kicking a dog and save the dog because the dog is the image of God, I save the dog and I don't kick the dog because I'm the image of God, and God wouldn't do that because God cares for the sparrow. I care for the sparrow. Now, God does put a certain priority on what's most important, humanity or the sparrow. So he's going to be like, well, even though I love the sparrow and I care for it, humanity is why I made this whole thing. So humans, if you're hungry and you need to, eat the sparrow. But he does not make humans that way, because humans, he says, no, humans I made for this. Humans are meant to image me. And so even when they don't image me, my plan is to redeem them or judge them, but I'll do the judging. And I didn't come into Christ says, look, I didn't come into the world to judge it this time. I came to save it. He's going to judge it in the after. So we're not to judge the world. Paul himself says, what do I have to do with the world? I judge people in the church, but I don't judge the world. So judgment is not now for the world in that sense, or it's basically up to God when he does bring about that judgment. I'm to, as the church at least, to save humanity, try to redeem them. And I want the state to conform to that mission so that it's not just unjustly killing people, even if they're not Christians, because I want to redeem as many as I can. Like, I don't know who God has chosen, so I'm trying to just redeem whoever. And so that's the mission of the church. So that's why I wouldn't kill and eat another human being, because I don't know who's the son of God and who is not. And I also wanted to actually deal justly and rightly and mercifully as God does with humanity, because I'm his image. That's the whole point. So it has nothing to do with them being the image. It has everything to do with me being the image.
And we kind of get this argument, a similar argument as Calvinists or as, Reformed people from the non-Reformed or Arminians, whatever. Why do you pray? If God has ordained everything, what's the point of praying? What's the point of even preaching the gospel, right? Because God's going to do what he does. It's like, well, because God has actually provided a means by which he's going to do everything he's decreed. So it's not to say, well, because one thing is true, then the other extreme is what, put on our shoulders. It's not my prerogative to decide who's saved and not saved. I have a command to pray and bring the gospel, and God will sort it out as he wills. And it's the same idea, but the Reformed don't get that. They'll say, because they'll be, they'll agree with us all day long, but with the image stuff, they're like, well, no, you have to put value on some kind of trinket, internal spiritual trinket that we can't see.
Inherent value.
Inherent value.
That's important, because it's not even, look, as the image, I'm going to put value on what God puts value on and delineate it the way God does, but it's not inherent value, because if it's inherent, then it doesn't matter what God does. God could literally be like, all right, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go into a parallel universe, I'm going to be out of here. But that thing would still have value because it's inherent. It's like, no.
Yeah.
It has value insofar as God places value on Adolf Hitler. He placed value on Adolf Hitler. He played a role. Now, is for evil purposes. Now, God actually did good, I think, as he does good through all evil, in showing us this is what Satan's world looks like. And this is what Satan looks like when he rules over you, basically, is this absolute hell that he brings on the earth. But even that is a good thing, and it has a purpose, and therefore Hitler had a value, but not the type of value to where, it's an inherent value. The Bible actually tells us, it speaks of murderers as being worthless. And then Paul quotes that in Romans 3 and says, all, both Jew and Gentile, everyone, all have become worthless. All have become worthless. They were made to be God's image, but they became worthless because they were no longer God's image. That's what do you do with that? You're going to connect. Are you going to reject Paul's words or try to misconstrue them or reinterpret? So many people try to reinterpret the word. And it's like, it means worthless people. It means having no value. It's talking about the inherent value of the thing.
You see, even Nebuchadnezzar is kind of a good case study for this. He rejects God and he becomes like an animal.
Yeah.
That's how he functions. He doesn't retain some kind of inherent, godlike characteristic that makes him transcend the animal kind. No, he becomes like an animal.
Yeah. Well, he's not filling the earth at that point. In fact, at that point, he's actually admiring the fact that he's reduced the population of the earth and all the riches he's gotten from it. And God's like, bam, because he's doing the opposite of the role of the image at that point.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to transition and maybe bring this to the abortion clinic.
There you go.
Let's bring it to areas where we would use
racism.
The places we would say, well, we do this because you're the image of God.
That was half the videos that I listened to today. How the image of God changes everything and how we view race and all that sort of thing. And it's like, the idea that somehow, again, this is liberalism. This is how we get rid of divisions, right? It's by saying everybody's the image. And instead, what I want to say is that, in a sense, racism is destroyed by the people of God because they're all sons of God. They all are. They all are the image of God from every tribe and nation and tongue. They're all the image of God. And so in that way, yes, we're all one tribe in that way. We're all one nation that's made, this holy nation that we've been made out of all these nations. And I think Christianity rids the world of racism. But there's nothing to rid the wicked world of racism because the wicked world are not all the same. They're all different. They all have different sort of ideals and cultural taboos, and they all want the world to be their way and this way. There's no unifying thing in the world. And what fake Christianity has done, liberal Christianity has done, is it wants to solve the problems in the wicked world apart from Jesus. So it gives the wicked world our reason for not being racist. And says you're all the image of God, therefore you're all one thing, and you shouldn't actually divide and be different and everything. It's like, no, that's solved in Jesus, and it's not solved in you, because when you do it, you're just making up a falsehood. And in reality, in the end, it doesn't solve racism. It doesn't solve hatred. People still are tribal, and they hate each other all the more. And the image of God doesn't solve a problem because, again, you need to actually be transformed into a son. You can't just say you're a son. You have to be transformed as a son in order to think that way and actually see people this way. And so if you're not, then you're just actually putting a mask on in the wicked world.
Yeah, I'm going to keep ringing this bell over and over, but I think there are really serious gospel implications for this. When you do this, you downplay sin, you downplay wickedness, you downplay the problems that are baked into the wicked world, and you say you can have something good without Christ, and you can't.
Yeah, here's a solution without Jesus. It's like, no, there is no moral solution without Jesus. That is a different religion.
Yeah. Put two gangs in Chicago together and say, oh, you both have the image of God, and they'll kill,
Don't kill each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. They'll just use that as a way to kill each other more effectively.
Yeah, because people who are not the image of God don't care about being like God.
Right.
They don't care about being like God. They don't care about doing what God would do. And so they're not going to treat one another fine. So image of God means nothing to the wicked world. You're just saying that basically you're okay with God. Don't worry about this message about Jesus coming and having to be accountable to him because you're the image of God already. All it does is make the gospel impotent and solves no problems whatsoever in the world.
Yeah, and it's confusing too, because if you do something based on a lot, like if I actually think that everyone's the image of God and I do something because of that, well then I think I fixed something. I've right, and then actually I've fixed nothing, and then I try to progress, right, because I did something, and then I just make everything worse. I muddy the waters even more. Now the gospel, as April was saying, now the gospel is more confusing.
Yeah.
We can get the abortion clinic, but the lady that walks away who doesn't abort their baby because she's told that her and the baby are the image of God. She walks away to her house, still unsaved. Now she might have the child, but
what? Yeah. Now she just raises the child to be another image of the devil. It's like, all right, now the devil has one more in the world. Congrats. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't try to save the baby, because we're all about redeeming humans. We want that baby to be redeemed one day. We want the mother to be redeemed, but they're redeemed with the gospel. And the gospel would come in and say, you're not in relationship with God. You're not his image. You were made to be that, but you have actually rebelled against God, and you have become something opposite of that. You become an image of the devil. And your being here at the abortion clinic today proves that point, because God is the giver of life and his images are life givers. You are murdering your baby today instead. You need to repent, give your life to Christ, because he has actually died for you so that you can come back in. You can actually be united to him, be restored as a child of God, as the image of God, and be a life giver. And you can do that today by walking away from this place, receiving Christ as Lord, and raising your child, having and raising your child to worship God through Jesus Christ. Like that's what the message should be. Not, hey, you're the image of God and murder's bad, and don't do this because you'll regret it later. And it's all these pragmatic arguments. It's like, yeah, well, I hope if you do evil that your life is destroyed. Yeah, I hope you feel really bad later on. That you murdered someone. But like in the end, like that's not the reasoning I need to give them. I need to give them reasoning of like, hey, you're not in a relationship with God, which is why you're doing this thing right here. You need to come into a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, and you need to fall under his lordship. He is the life giver, and you are to be a life giver from now on. That's what your repentance looks like.
Yeah, and that's been one of my biggest complaints with the pro-life movement is it's all about saving babies and not about saving souls.
Yep. Well, and ironically, we end up not saving babies. Then you're going to save a baby that's going to go to hell. Then who cares?
Or what if the baby is saved and then they take over Planned Parenthood later and make it even worse? I mean, like, right? Like you that's a worse. I mean, you just made it worse. So like, even using this logic, this image logic to give anyone the gospel, right? So like if you want to be like homosexuals, right? Why do we treat like a homosexual or a transgender person with respect? Well, the mantra is, well, we treat them with respect because they are the image of God, right? So like otherwise we would just we would just I don't know, either cannibalize them or put them on an island and nuke them. But
does God respect people that he's sending into hell? Well, I mean, what does respect mean? If it includes people that you're gonna like burn in hell for all eternity, that's the same thing with love, right? It's like, oh, God loves everybody. It's like, well, if love includes like sending you away to eternal torment, then I don't know what the word love means ananymore. Like I don't know what respect means, if it means that like God wants you to be tortured.
Find out what it means to me.
I like if God's okay with you being tortured for eternity, and that's the right punishment and just and everything, that's what he wants in terms of his justice, then in what way is that respect? Like, I don't get it. Like, we respect people because we don't have the knowledge of God as who is going to be redeemed and who's going to be a son of God. And therefore, I want to respect everyone in light of the fact that they could be a son of God. Not that they are now, but that they could be a son of God. And so I want to respect them because I'm trying, and notice respecting them is in the context of communicating Christ and the gospel to them. It's not, I really respect Adolf Hitler for how he treated the Jews. It's like, no, it's not talking about everything. It's talking about specifically you're communicating the gospel to people who may actually, because they're not sons of God, images of God, they may actually be treating you even poorly. They may be spitting in your face as like, you walk by the transgender crowd or whatever. It doesn't matter. You're to respect them because you don't know who's going to be saved. You need to actually brush that off, take the hit in order to realize I want to save this person. And many times we've seen that, right? People brush off the offense and they end up getting an audience with that person to speak to them. And that person ends up being a son of God. So disrespecting them would have been a blasphemy. So that's why we respect people. It's not because, because once we know that they're murderers, once, and God knows who they are, God doesn't respect them. God hates the murderer. The person he knows is not going to be redeemed. The person he knows is a murderer as a murderer and remains a murderer for eternity. God hates that person. There's no respect there for that person. In God's eyes, that person is worthless and remains worthless forever.
I think it's an important definition of respect for the Christian. It is not placing the judgment that is reserved for God. It is giving them, and then not taking it personally when they do spit on you. It's not like I'm not giving them I'm just being, again, as we've said before, this is just what image bearers do. We take punches because our kingdom will last. This is John's
true
point.
Tolerance, by the way. True tolerance, not because they're the images of God again, but because for the sake of Christ and the gospel and the fact that they may be our brothers in Christ in the future. That's why we tolerate.
Right. And what is it to me that I get punched in the face when I am awaiting eternity? And they're on as I have said before, the sinking ship, right?
Yeah.
That ship will sink and it will be gone eventually. Ours will not. So, and I think that's a good mindset to have when you are being spat on. And it is very violating. I don't think people realize, just like if anyone has had their home broken into, even when you're not there, when you're there, it's even worse. But if you have your home broken into, there's like a violation. You feel violated.
Yeah.
And it's hard to even put into words. As Christians, we have to get used to feeling that way and then not reacting as our flesh wants to, which is the fight or flight, right? We have to actually subdue that with the love of Christ. The love of Christ, the inner man, actually subdues the fight or flight and speaks love to that person.
This brings us to another point then in terms of priority, because according to like Genesis 9, we do give respect to people and we would take the hits. However, preserving someone that is known to be an image of God takes priority over preserving someone who is known not to be an image of God. And by that, I don't mean like in a partial way or whatever. What I mean is if you have someone break into your house and you've got yourself who needs to support your wife, children, or you have your wife and children there even, then you preserving the sons of God, again, filling up the earth with the sons of God, the images of God, it takes priority over the life of that individual. And I always say, look, the Bible's very clear. It repeats this phrase that when it's commanding, when God's commanding Israel, for instance, to execute for crimes and all that, God will constantly say, and his blood, the person is being executed, his blood is on his hands. Meaning like I do not see his blood on your hands, the one who executed him. He executed himself by actually doing this crime. So by trying to kill you, he has killed himself. You've not killed him. So in self-defense, the same way. I would say he's not the image of God. His judgment will now be in the hands of God, whoever he is. I have to protect images of God over him, but also it's not even really me killing him. It's he has killed himself by breaking into my house.
This is probably also a good segue into James, because I would argue James in context is the epistle of prioritizing the image bearers of God, which is why that text James 3:9.
James 3:9, yeah.
Right. I'm gonna butcher it if I try to.
I can read it if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna start in 8. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so.
Yeah.
Add a little emphasis there.
Brothers, yeah. Well, James opens up with the clear indication of who he's talking to. He's talking to believers. This is to the church, about how the church is interacting with one another. He goes into.
Yeah, can I? Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to support that by reading this real quick. But one of the big problems is versification, right? So, oh well, this is chapter 4, but in reality, like this is the flow of the whole thing. And he says in 4:1, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you?
Among you, yeah.
So he's talking about them slandering one another, and that they have passions at war with them that basically are causing all these divisions, and for them to think lowly of one another within the covenant community.
Well, James 3 starts this way. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers. There's a lot of this, like, my brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no place in that epistle where he veers off and talks about the Gentile, the unsaved.
Right. Yeah.
So for him, stylistically, and I believe this is the same James that is residing over the Jerusalem Council, and I think this is James the Just, right? This is the one that is martyred as he's pushed off the temple, right?
Yeah.
And stylistically, he stays in the argument. He doesn't go in and out. So for him to just reach a point when he says, "Oh, by the way, Christian, I mean that you talk to anybody like this," and then come right back into specific examples of other Christians, doesn't make sense stylistically for James.
Well, did Jesus disobey this then? If it's talking about everybody, like you brood of vipers, you whitewashed sepulchers, you sons of the devil.
John the Baptist, who warns you,
right? Yeah. Brood of vipers. It's just like whitewashed walls. I mean, it's just sort, and it's clear. Look, it's clear that those are considered speaking bad about someone, because Paul says in Acts to the high priest, "You whitewashed wall." And what is and he gets slapped for it, or actually he gets slapped first. Then he says, "You whitewashed wall." And then the one of the guys says, "Do you speak that way to the high priest?" And Paul says, "Oh, I didn't know he was the high priest." He repents because he says, "I didn't know that was the high priest. For it is written, you will not speak bad about a ruler of your people." So this is speaking bad. Jesus is speaking bad. I don't know why you'd think otherwise. Brood of vipers. Does that sound good? Would you want someone to call you that? I mean, obviously that's speaking bad of someone, but they're not sons of God. It has nothing to do with it. So he's calling them what they are. And it speaks bad of them because they're bad. That's what they are. So he's just calling them out for what they are. I do want to read this from 4:11, because I think that, again, he's just, like Drake said, he's on the subject, right? It's the same thing. Do not speak, is 4:11. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. And then he goes on about, how to judge rightly and all that. But it's clearly about brothers and what's happening amongst other images of God, and how this is wicked, because if we really represent God as his sons, as his images, then, as Christ said, whatever you do to even the least of these, most insignificant one, you've done to me, because they're all his image.
Yeah. And if you think practically, it's real easy for me to not talk bad about a stranger that does something wicked to me. or even, you know, even just an acquaintance. But when it's like it's a family member or another, in this case, like another church member, when they do something, it's really hard not to call them Raka. Like,
because they're supposed to be Christians, right? You expect more because they're supposed to be Christians. So you're just like, it gets you even angrier. And yet we're told to hold it and see it in right perspective even more. You're actually to take it on the cheek.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to say, if you're in Christian leadership, you have to judge correctly, and you have to warn people of the judgment. You have to actually judge people or whatever. That's part of the role. But just as a Christian within the church, it's really hard on a personal level to do what Christ tells you to do, which is you are to love them. By the way, and that's actually what Matthew's talking about, by the way, to love your enemy. That's to love the person who is your opponent within the covenant community. That's what Matthew's all talking about. And so that's the hardest thing to do. It's easy to love the world. I had a lot of people who, when I was talking about the neighbor thing or whatever, absolutely treated me like garbage. I was slandered like no tomorrow. I probably still am for that issue, just for talking about that issue. And yet the irony is that the very passage that's talking about that is telling you to love the person you don't agree with in the covenant community, the person who's your opponent and all that. Whereas these people would see themselves as incredibly loving of like the world and unbelievers. And it's like, well, okay, well, that's not really what you're being called to do. It's easy, again, like Drake said, it's easy to love the people who are outside your camp. It's the people inside your camp you're being called to love when they betray you in some way, when they speak. It literally says when they say bad things about you, when they, you know, they're not loving toward you. And so
everyone is your neighbor except for Brian.
Yeah, well, exactly. It reminds me of like the cults, right? It's like everybody's God but Jesus in the cults. Like you know, every new age movement was like everybody's God. Oh, Jesus didn't claim he was God. It's like, oh, okay, everybody gets to be God but Jesus.
But we do that. It's like I'm gonna love everyone, right? I'm gonna love the world. But that guy sitting in the next pew, I'm not gonna love him.
I hate that guy though, and I don't have to love him because this is talking about the world here. Again, it's like, well, everybody's the image, so I don't really need to like be on guard to love the church more, to love Christians more or anything, because everybody's the same. So to the level I've reached in my life to love everybody, then that's what I'm going to have. That just leads to you hating lots of people because you're not purposely training your mind to love the people that God has commanded you to love.
But that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah.
Because that's the neighbor.
Well, yeah, but you can see it linked though, right? It's just the fatherhood of God part is linked to the brotherhood of man.
What I think the implications of this theology is kind of self-evident in the examples that we've given. But just to kind of wrap things nice and tightly, why does this matter? Why does it matter what I think the image is or not? Why can't I just keep my tradition and just think everybody's the image? Is that really gonna hurt my Christian walk? Is that gonna hamper, you know, my witness to the world in any way?
Yeah, you know, I think the answer there is the same to the answer of why does Pelagianism matter? Like why does it matter? Why does semi-Pelagianism matter? Because the problem is if you believe that there's a spark in humanity, if there's a relational connection between humanity and God, then there's something that humans have in relationship to God and ability to have a relationship with God and to be the image of God apart from Jesus Christ, apart from the relationship that they need, that they can only gain through the gospel. And this makes the gospel almost supplementary or secondary or just kind of shoring up what you already are. But it's just something that it's not really a necessity. I actually think because of this view, this is why people question hell all the time. I actually think this is why people don't think there's a hell. God wouldn't do that to his images.
Right.
to his sons, his creation. God loves everyone. We're all in relationship with God. Well, why do I need Jesus now? That to me is the central issue with that. Apart, you can say that there's a lot of other implications and things that happen, but that is the thing that I'm most concerned about. I actually think it attacks the gospel, which is why I've been on and on about the image all the time. And I think people don't get that. I think they think I'm just bringing up some controversial matter. And I'm like, no, it's if you believe that everybody's the image. I realize that people who believe that everybody's the image are still preaching the gospel in the church. I realize they're preaching something that's undermining the other thing. That's the problem. And they don't see it.
Yeah, it's a message of confusion for the unbeliever, because you're saying to the unbeliever, you desperately need Christ, but you still have something good in yourself.
Yeah, so you're still connected to God.
Which is it? Which is it?
Right. You're still children of God. It's like, well, I mean, I know that my parents, as bad as I might be, and as much as I may never even talk to them, they're always going to love me. They're never going to send me to a place like hell. That no way. No parent that loves me is ever going to do that. So maybe I should accept Jesus, but I don't really know what for, because I'm not going to hell anyway. But in the end of the day, God's just gonna be like, all right, well, I told you to accept Jesus, but you are my son, so all right, come on in. And it's like, I really think people subconsciously have this idea.
Yeah,
I really, especially Americans, think this idea. And it's like, no, you are completely, what does Ephesians say? I actually want to read it because I don't want to butcher it. But let me tell you, this is what Christians are described as before they came to Jesus, before they were raised with Christ. So Ephesians 2, verse 1, and you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. Notice, not sons of God, sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of God. No, not children of God, children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. That's what we are apart from Jesus.
Yeah.
You're nothing but someone. If you are not going to be redeemed in Jesus, you are a vessel of wrath. You're someone that God is going to take his anger, his just anger, out upon. You are a murderer of his people and creation, and he is going to have you, he's going to hand you over to the torturers that you are tormented for eternity. That is what you are, not a child of God. And therefore, that's where the next thing Paul says, but God, being rich in mercy because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses. So he's still loving us in our trespasses in view of who we're going to be in Christ. Notice it's us, not all humanity.
Yeah.
Made us alive together with Christ. By grace you've been saved, and raised us up with it. So in the gospel, God in his love and mercy has given us hope. That's our message to the world. You have absolutely no hope. You are cut off from God, cut off from the commonwealth of his people. He has nothing to do with you. You will not be blessed by God in eternity. You will be cursed by him in eternity. The wrath of God is upon you, but the hope he has given you is in Jesus Christ. He has called all men then to repent and come to his son, because he has fixed a day upon which he will judge the world.
Amen. Well, we didn't know you're going to get a sermon.
You
didn't know you're going to get a sermon in this podcast, but here we are. Awesome. Well, I love that we don't like to talk about difficult things and hard topics. I'm glad this is a light, easy conversation, but it was, people can't see my sarcasm on my face because I'm frozen. But
great look too, by the way. Fantastic look to freeze on.
Yeah, it's great. The typical. Alexander, fix that later.
AI like Drake in a bear suit or something.
Yeah, or you could put me in like in a pew, because Brian was.
I literally have a bear behind me.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, you are
sweet.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
that's not the cuddly kind though.
No,
That
not
is a
so
man. That is a
cuddly.
man killer.
Yeah,
That is not the image of God. But look, we know this is difficult. I know I'm some of you hearing this is you're hearing it for the first time. This is fresh. This is your world might have been rocked. You might be reading the Bible from Genesis 1 all through again, and with this paradigm, and you might have questions, and we're going to try our best to answer those. And there's comments that you can leave. We are busy, so we try to get to those comments the best we can. If we're delayed on that, don't worry about it. We'll try to get to those.
I almost never look at them, but
yeah, well,
I know April does sometimes, and
I look
I've answered
at the
a couple.
comments.
Yeah, I looked at a couple as well.
So I can look at the comments, and I can do the administrative job, and I can present your comments to the elders.
There you go.
And we would love to talk to you. And again, because this is an important thing. This isn't just it's not ideophora, right? I mean, it is implicit in what the gospel is. So, but it's good to talk about this with you guys. And if you want to stay tuned, we're about to record our Patreon session on Moby Dick. So, I don't even know. I'm trying to connect.
I'm trying to connect. All sorts of themes, actually. There's a lot of stuff in there about the American gospel and transcendentalism and all sorts of stuff. So,
spoiler alert: Moby Dick is the image of God.
There it is. Everything opposite what we said.
There are all sorts of interpretations of Moby Dick, so stick around for the bar fight.
But only one correct one.
Don't be the captain.
Don't be the captain. Don't be Ahab.
Don't be Ahab.
Come to Christ and become the image.
Yes, but if you want to join us and get rowdy on a sailing ship, or at least talking about it, come join us on Patreon and buy us. I would say sailors drink beer. We don't really drink beer ourselves, but if we did, buy us a pretend beer. So we'll see you over on Patreon.
Yeah, Brian said his favorite drink is chocolate milk, so buy him a chocolate milk.
Sailors definitely drink chocolate milk on a regular basis.
I don't ever drink it though.
You just look at it. This looks great.
He just dreams of
stare at it
chocolate
from across
milk.
the room.
Yeah. All right. God bless. We'll talk to everyone later. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.
I haven't read the series. Might not understand what would need to happen.
Have you read all of them?
I've read all of Frank Herbert's novels. Yes.
Oh, you've read all of them. I've only read the first one because my grandma told me that the other ones were bad.
Let me just start with this. Frank Herbert is not a good storyteller. Not a good storyteller. He's a fantastic world builder.
Harry and I, we're pals. Harry and I were
Harry and the Hendersons.
You grew up at Hogwarts?
The first book came out. Harry and I were around the same age. And so I grew up with books. Like the last book came out when I was 19. And Harry was around 19. This, I went to a Christian high school, so this was a big deal. It was a big thing. Harry Potter is evil, and you can't be reading this or participating in this.
The reason why I like Moby Dick so much is, to me, there's a parallel with Genesis. So it's actually history. It's history that Melville he's interviewed. This actually occurred to a bunch of whalers.
Yeah.
And the survivors he interviewed.
Yeah.
And it became this book. But notice how he's writing this history. It's not, here's all the facts that happened. All right, the end. He's writing it because he wants to put meaning and a message to what has occurred.